Welcome to another episode of Parenting Teens Advice Redefined, but this is the WTF series. Welcome to Friday, or what the you get to choose what works for you, depends on how your week has gone. I am Cheryl Pankhurst. I'm your host, and the WTF series is no editing, no filtering, no cuts, no nothing. It's just me riffing on something on Fridays, pretty much about something that has happened this week. And I want to talk about, I did this amazing corporate event last week. And I am not just a parent advocate, I'm also take on the role of workplace family support consultant. And so in these large corporations, we have amazing companies who are hiring neurodivergent staff, employees, and supporting them in their accommodations, modifications to the schedules, whatever, which is a blast. I love hearing this. But we also have to understand that behind that employee, there's a very good chance they have a neurodivergent kid. And what does that mean to support the parent behind the employee? We now have a parent who is dealing with way more appointments and meetings than a typical employee might have to work through, dealing with multiple phone calls home from the school. It's time to come and pick your kid up. There's some dysregulation going on at the school, and we need you to come drop everything in your amazing career that you love. Try and tell your team, try and tell your supervisor, feeling very isolated, very alone, and a lot of shame and guilt about having to leave your team and leave your career for the day, for the week. But also, there's also the shame and guilt that you're not there for your kid when all this happens. I understand it. I was on making the calls to the parents when these things were going down, and my heart just broke. And this is why, in creating this business, I also decided that I wanted to support parents who have a career, the one they worked hard for, love, need to pay their mortgage and put food on the table, and support the whole parent and the whole employee in these big corporate offices. I think it's really important. Anyway, so the conversation was amazing. We were streamed across Canada, and so people were calling in with questions. And I talked about one of the questions last week about labeling, about actually getting diagnoses, because if we are getting the data from the school, and we know as parents intuitively something is very challenging and impacting our kids' life, taking the next step is family doctor, psychologist referrals, and in the long run, quite likely an assessment. And if the psychoeducational assessment is thorough and there are some challenges there, your kid will receive a diagnosis. And a big question was, what happened? We don't want to label our kid. So let's talk about that, because we're not labeling our kid, we're giving them a diagnosis. And how we approach that is going to be everything. Once you have your assessment in hand and you can have it broken down, interpreted into language we always use, as opposed to the language that's on these assessments, we can sit down with our kid and say, oh my goodness, now I understand. This is not to label you. This is not to label our kids. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to understand our kid better. It doesn't change our kid. It doesn't change us as parents in our parenting. But what it does is it helps us understand our kids better. And in turn, they understand themselves better. And then they can advocate for themselves. So the school understands them better. We advocate together. So the school understands them better. And so if you were to take your assessment and sit down in layman's terms with your kid, break it down, Instead of saying, oh, you have ADHD. How about, okay, that explains this, and be very specific. So, for example, remember how you used to come home from school every day? And I used to say, oh, did you do your homework? Did you clean up your room? How was the math test? Did you do the assignment? Are you late? I got a call. All of those things. Fired the questions at you. And then you lost your shit. This is why. This is why you lost your shit. And this helps me to understand that I can't do that when you walk in the door anymore. I can say, hey, you must be completely exhausted. You spent 6 hours having to hold it together and do your thing at school. And then you walk in the door and I'm like firing questions at you and expecting an answer. Of course you lose your shit. Of course. This completely makes it so understandable now. Or here's another example. Okay, you know how I tell you you need to be down at the front door at 7:40 because we have to get to school and you have to brush your teeth and you have to make your bed and you have to go, and I list up everything you need to do, and do not come downstairs until everything's done and be at the door by 7:40. And then you come down at 7:45 and you have done one of the 17 things I listed off for you to do. And then I lose my shit. Now I understand why you came down at 7:45. You only did 2 of the 17 things I listed off, and I should not be losing my shit. The way you learn is different. Next time, I'm not going to list off a whole bunch of instructions. I'm going to put Post-it notes on the bathroom mirror, and you're going to rip them off as you get things done. I am going to give you a timer. I'm going to give you some really quick one-word warnings. Hey, we got 5 minutes left. Hey, we got 20 minutes left. Not a lot of language, not a whole ping pong argument conversation every single morning. This now tells me that you can't do this. You can't take 15 instructions, remember everything, get it done, and be there on time. You can't. You're not able. Not that you won't. You can't. So all that to say, these assessments and the results in the assessments, yes, we have to have a diagnosis. Yes, we need to have a formal IP. Yes, we need the paperwork. But more importantly, it does not define who you are. It helps me understand how you learn. It helps me understand how to support you at home. So we have less arguments. I get to be more mom and less tyrant. You get to be more kid and less victim of a rally of instructions, a rally of expectations that I have on you that I shouldn't be putting on you, or that you can tell me how we can work together to meet expectations that need to be met. So it's not in any way, shape, or form a label. It does not define who they are. And when you look very closely at the assessment, I'll bet you can go through, even if you have an advocate to interpret it for you, I'll bet you can easily say, oh, now I get it. And not just your home situation. Now you can see why your kid is sitting in class for 80 minutes a day and getting lectured on a lesson and then getting reports back. Well, he didn't start the assignment, or she didn't hear a word. She zoned right out. I went through everything. I put the assignment right in front of them and they did nothing. Oh, well, maybe you need a visual. Maybe you need some notes in front of you as the teacher's talking and highlight what the teacher's talking about. Maybe you need step-by-step instruction for math equations. Maybe, like all of these things, maybe you just need some noise canceling headphones to get the distractions out. But there's so much information inside these valuable assessments that really explains so much about our kid, for our kid. And if you involve them in all of it, not just the testing, but the results, the breakdown, the summary, why does this look like this? Why does this look like that? I bet the light bulb goes on and it no longer becomes a label. It just becomes an understanding. And I'll tell you something else in my experience. If we don't want to label, if we don't want to move forward with assessments because we're afraid it's going to label our kid, if we don't appropriately diagnose our kids, they will diagnose themselves. I promise you. And their diagnosis of themselves will be way worse than any diagnosis on an assessment, because they begin to understand that they don't learn like everybody else. They don't sit like everybody else. They don't absorb information like everybody else. They can't test like everybody else. And then they become bad or incompetent or incapable, less than. They will diagnose themselves so much worse than any diagnosis comes out of a psychologist's office. And this can also lead to self-medication. We know our kids get into high school, grade 9, grade 10. That's my knowledge, probably younger. And kids are smoking weed. And cannabis on an ADHD brain is very, very different than cannabis on a brain that does not have ADHD. So we need to be very cautious and very intentional about what is happening with our kids at school, at home, and what is the real trigger behind, I don't want to get a diagnosis. I don't want to go through with an assessment. We'll just do this. We'll just do that. They'll be fine. Try to understand why you're thinking that. And there's never judgment. I promise. There's never a judgment, because we can always move forward from here. But I just really want you to understand weigh what can happen if we are just going to brush it under the rug, not pursue anything that we are getting all this information that maybe we should, compared to let's get a diagnosis, let's understand you as a whole person, not just as a student, but as a whole person. And then we get to understand how to support you best. I think it's a good trade-off. I really do. If you have any questions about this, I'm going to drop my website in the show notes. There's also a free consultation call if you need to discuss it, if you have some questions about what I'm talking about. Or if this has nothing to do with you, but you know somebody, please share this, because this could really save a lot of stress, a lot of angst, and a lot of holding back some success for our kids who just need a different path and can be very, very successful and feel very supported. So thank you for listening. WTF, welcome to Friday, or what the, I'm Cheryl Pankhurst. I'm your host, and I'm so grateful that you're here. And we will see you next week.